This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to give it another minute or so for people to file in before we get started. All right. We're at about a minute after the hour. I think we're ready to get started. So welcome, everybody, to our 5 Steps to a 5 webinar. We're going to be talking about the AP English Lit and Composition exam today. My name is Bob O'Sullivan. I'm the Associate Publisher of Test Prep at McGraw-Hill. And we hope you enjoy the session. We're planning on 90 minutes with Dr. Michael Hartnett. He's the author of our 5 Steps Lit guide. I think we're just going to start with a couple of housekeeping items up top. Mike, if you can just hit that slide, please. We just to point out that we're happy to have both AP teachers and students in this session, but we did design it primarily as a student-focused session. We're about 6 weeks out from the exam, 6 or so weeks left. So we know that the value here is reaching students and giving them the information they need. That said, as an educator, you'll also find a lot of tips in here that will be relevant to you. And teachers, feel free to share this with other educators, students, go tell your friends. It's open for everybody. The second bullet there is just, you'll notice that we have asked people to limit your questions to the Q&A features again. But really, as we know, what we've discovered as we're doing a number of these sessions is if you have a question that comes up during the session, please ask it. We'll be looking at the chat and the Q&A feature. A lot of times questions come up and they're helpful to everybody. And Mike doesn't mind being interrupted. We can just sort of go with it. And they often turn out to be helpful. So please do ask questions whenever you have them. If you're in there and you see that somebody's already asked the question that you have, just click the thumbs up icon so we know it's important. Quick note that no one on the call can see one another. You guys should not be able to see one another, but you should be able to see both me and Dr. Hartnett, and here Anya and Simone, who are also on the McGraw-Hill team, who will be able to pipe in as needed. Importantly, just to note that no student data is being collected. Teachers, if you have concerns, students, if you have concerns, don't worry about that. We are not collecting any data or anyone's email address or anything, so no need to be concerned in that front. Note on interactivity that you'll see as we go through, in addition to asking questions, there'll be polls when we run through some practice multiple choice questions. Polling will come up. Please do participate. It makes it a lot more fun and engaging for everybody when everybody participates, even if you don't know the answer, yes. And it just makes it a more lively session. And lastly, most importantly, the session is being recorded. If you want to take a quick second and take a picture of that bit.ly, that URL at the bottom with your phone, that's where we'll show it again at the end. But that's where you can go starting tomorrow to find the recording of this session. Again, teachers, feel free to send that link out to your fellow educators, students, show your friends. We hope to reach as many eyeballs as we can in giving this information out. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Michael Hartnett. I hope you don't mind me calling you Mike. Mike.
Sure, of course.
Over to you.
All right, thank you. So today we'll spend our time, I'm just going to try to be as practical as possible what we go through, which will mean some slides I'll move through very quickly and others we'll take our time with, depending on where we need to focus and, really more than anything else, how we separate the elements of the test. because when you look at the test itself, it is pretty much half poetry and half prose. And we'll spend a little bit more time on poetry because I think more students are uncomfortable with dealing with poems rather than the prose itself. So if we take a look, this is the edition. The Elite Edition is very handy as far as to get the most number of practice sessions in as you go through an exam like this and trying to look at it and make sense of everything. We have the 2023 edition, which I'll speak a little bit about later because there's some extra elements in there that will be very helpful as far as trying to come up with new tricks to write more substantial essays. So I'll spend some time on that as we get further along. I've been teaching AP Lit for more than 30 years. And so my focal point will be, as much as anything else, to look in the practical ways of making sense of everything as we go through. So I'll try to address these frequently asked questions as much as possible. Remember, the test itself is Wednesday, May 3rd. That's at 8 a.m. in the morning. And we will talk about really how to break that down and how to approach everything as we progress. You can, when you're doing these study recommendations for 4 weeks compared to doing everything for 2 weeks, beforehand, it's really a breakdown of now's the time to start practicing taking tests. If you haven't yet, maybe some of your teachers have already had you take parts of multiple choice questions. Maybe some of you have already taken a number of practice essays. At this point, with it being May 3rd and now we're at March 16th, so we have about 6 weeks left or so, you want to make sure you're at least writing an essay a week. And I'll give you more on that as we progress and go through everything. So if you look at the basics of the test, again, like all AP tests, it's graded on a 1 to 5 level, with 5 being obviously the top overall. And the breakdown, when we come to taking the test, you will have 55 multiple choice questions that will take you an hour. Or that's all you'll have, is that hour as far as how long you have to go through those 55 questions. And usually it's pretty much a fair distribution of half poetry and half prose or short stories to some extent. The other 2 hours will be your essays. Okay. And the 3 essays that for that 2 hours, so you're pretty much breaking it down to 40-minute components. You'll do one on poetry, one on prose, and one they call basically the free response essay, which will be responding to a prompt that asks you to write either about a novel or a full-length play. So those are the 3 essays that you will have to do. Those essays, just to complicate things, while the whole test is from 1 to 5, the essay scores individually are from 1 to 6. And when we start going over the essays a little later on, I'll go to how they're graded and scored overall. The essays consist of 55% of your grade. The multiple choice consists of 45% of your grade. The in-person test that you'll be taking, most of you will be taking probably an in-person, but I think there's been more movement to digital in the last year. And one of the reasons why is there's a change new on this exam, on the digital exams. You can now go back and forth throughout the multiple choice questions, when in the past you couldn't do that. Now the way it works is the same way it functions in person, and that you can move back and forth. And as a matter of fact, it really is worthwhile. If I put down there, if you notice that last bullet, College Board video, taking a digital AP exam, what you should do is type in that, just say taking a digital AP exam. I did it on my own Google search, and you'll hit that information right away. It'll be the first College Board bit of information that you hit, and you sort of scroll down to one level and you'll find a video, and the video describe all the nuances of how to take the digital exam of what you can actually start eliminating wrong answers. You can take little notes and put them up in places. So it instructs you of how to be able to do that. They've gotten much more sophisticated in how they administer the test compared to what they've done in the past. So look for that if you are taking a digital exam, and just go online and follow that before you do it, just to put yourself in a better position to be more. Everything about this exam is how can you be more comfortable in taking it. That's why you do multiple essays. That's why you take a series of multiple choice exams again and again. So everything is familiar and comfortable so you can navigate it quickly and well. All right. So as we move on to these next parts, how do you prepare everything? So you make this plan. Maybe all year long you've been taking AP Lit and your teacher has been making this plan with you and been guiding you along the way. I can tell you honestly, even though I've been teaching AP Lit for 30 years, I spend most of the first half of the year ignoring the exam because I want to spend my time reading great works of literature. So we do that. And only around January do I start giving out this other material. So that, and we start moving in this direction, but really in earnest, the preparation for the exam starts coming right about now, which is why we selected these dates to give these webinars, because this is the great time to sort of hunker down and work on it. So we have this 6-week window that you can work on and start planning out a calendar. A lot of you, for example, might have an April break that may interrupt some of that work. So you want to, as much as anything else, make that planning really work for you right now. If you look at what you're doing, you want to figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at. Maybe you're a really strong essay writer, so you should spend your time focusing much more on doing the multiple choice. Try very hard to have a study group if you can. This can be awfully dry test preparation. So if you can interact with other people and work with other people, it takes some of the deadening boredom that can happen sometimes when you're doing this. Look, with all standardized tests, if you really think about it, one of the skills they're checking for is whether you have the concentration and attention span to pay attention to something that you might not be terribly interested in. Can you still focus when you're not that riveted by what you're reading? So you need to almost build up your stamina when it comes to reading more challenging poems and prose passages. And the more you do that, the better. And the more you're used to writing, if you can write 3 essays in 2 hours one day, that can build up that strength so that by the time you take the test, your head isn't hurting so much in the 3-hour exam that you're incapable of doing it. You usually take the 1-hour part of the exam, then about a 10-minute break, and then you take the next 2 hours where they're writing the essays that go along with it. So if you look at this book, this 5 Steps to It 5, you try to go through take that diagnostic test. If you haven't yet, now is a really good time to take the diagnostic test. You start trying to figure out your strengths and weaknesses. What are you getting wrong? Did you bomb the poetry section compared to doing the prose section? Did you find you got 5 answers wrong in a row? Because that often happens when people start losing confidence and getting confused as they're going through that. So you start taking that, you take that exam now if you haven't. And then in a few weeks, you should take practice exam number 1. So this should be all part of what you're doing. And if you can do it in your own personal plan, or if you can do this with a study group, that will be very helpful in how you build and develop over the course of that time. So that's as much of a focus as possible. And if you go through chapters 5 through 9 in the book, the 5 through 9 will take you into how to do those prose essays and literary argument. And there's even a section on chapter 4 of the multiple choice questions. Those are all very handy to really get your act together when it comes to doing this work. I will spend some time talking about a new special chapter we've added in, and I'll do that at the end. It's chapter 10, which will help prepare you more for your essay. So I'll do that later on as we progress through this time overall. So let me just make sure if we're doing this and starting to get through the test preparation. So let me just go back one and make sure I'm in the right. So 2 weeks before the exam, as much as possible, what you want to do is make sure at this point have done your work and now are taking practice exam number 2. And then you do those final studies that you go through everything. It is imperative when you're going through this and doing this work, the most important advice I can give you when it comes to multiple choice is after you take every part, the diagnostic part, test 1 and test 2, you want to really focus after you graded those, your answers. Look at the answers that you've gotten wrong. Suppose you've gotten the first time through a perfectly respectable score, a 35 out of 55. All your effort now is focusing on those 20 questions that you've gotten wrong. You want to go over them. You want to look at the right answers. You want to look at the explanations for them. And you want to try to figure out how you can get from those 20 questions that you got wrong to say the next time maybe 15 questions. You want to really analyze what you're getting wrong, realizing that probably by the time you're done, no matter what you do, maybe 5 of those questions, maybe you could get a 50 out of 55 on your perfect day. And that's great, because if you received 5 wrong on this test, you would get a 5 on the exam unless you really messed up your essays. It's okay. They know that there's going to be questions. Every time I take a test on this, and I've been doing it for 30 years, I disagree with 1 or 2 of their answers. There's nothing you can do about that, but you can get those other answers right. So you keep looking at your incorrect answers. You spend time trying to figure out the logic behind those correct answers and work through it. That's where, like I said, the bulk of your time should be. If you think about it, there's very little, this is a skill-based test. There's very little studying that you're doing at the end of the time. Like on May 1st and May 2nd, you're not trying to memorize much. Earlier on, you probably should spend your time looking through the glossary of 5-Step 205 to have literary terms down. And the more you practice these exams, the more you encounter those literary terms and you practice them and get them down, and they'll start becoming increasingly familiar to you. But this is a skill-based exam. Can you read a poetry passage and understand it? In both multiple choice and in essays. Same with prose. So like I said, your time needs to be spent much more incrementally than cramming at the very end because of these skills that you need to focus on, okay? The only thing you'll be doing near the end, and really that's where you could do a little bit of cramming, it's going back over, say, 5 larger works of literature, novels or full-length plays, say a work like Hamlet, or Jane Eyre, or even a work like The Great Gatsby or Crime and Punishment. You're going to try to study them back through and make sure you know the main characters. Make sure you know key scenes. Make sure you maybe know a quote or 2 from those works. That's where your studying comes in near the end. Because the other parts, you really can't keep studying poetry or prose passages. That's about it. That's what you do at that time. The rest of this advice here is figuring, a lot of what's happening here in the skill base. This has been your entire life of reading novels and trying to analyze better. So a lot of this is really based on you just getting better and practicing what needs to be done over here. So Now we're going to break down the sections, and we're going to start with the multiple choice. And we're going to look at the various types of multiple choice questions. And if you look at the bars that are in here, like for example, talking about chapter 4 does a great deal with multiple choice. So a lot of times those little blue bars will tell you where you can find the material in 5 Steps to a 5 as you go along. So there are 3 major types of multiple choice questions. The first is a straightforward question. Okay, the poem is an example of, say, C lyric, or the word smooth refers to what. So this is very direct, that's done here. The second one deals with the question that refers you to specific lines and asks you to draw a conclusion or to interpret it. That one is the most common question on the multiple choice on this particular AP Lit exam. You're going to see more of those than any other, okay? That's why it's important when you're taking the test, you read through the passage or the poem quickly. Like, you don't do it really deliberately. You read it through the way you do something at a normal pace. Because the thing about it is, on every one of these exams, you're going to have to basically read piecemeal through the entire work a second time. So it makes sense to read it through quickly, knowing that they're going to ask you about question 7 or question 8. Like line 7 or line 12. So it's going to drag you back through the entire work. So as a result of that, you want to make sure you're reading it through quickly the first time, because you only have 1 hour to take that test, and that allows for reading the passage and answering 55 questions. That's a lot of work to do. So that first fast read is important. The next one, which is becoming less frequent, there's fewer and fewer of these except questions, which all of the following except can rear its head and go in this direction, that can be part of it. They require more time. Okay, so, and also I want to deal with what in some ways becomes another part of this, that you can get questions that can ask these last part. There's different types of questions that can ask about inferences and abstract concepts. For example, in this poem, My Last Duchess, the reader can infer that the speaker is arrogant, where you're asked to make a jump based on information and then logic that follows through. The longest, hardest questions at times is the 5th one that I listed here. The question that asks you to look at a pair of lines. Which 2 lines best represent opposing views? This one is the most time consuming, because if you look at a pair of lines, line 7 and 23 is the right answer on this one. But suppose they ask for lines 9 and 16, and then you'd have to go through and look at all of those pairs when you're making a decision. These are the questions that if you're going to skip a question because of time, these are the ones to skip, because they're tremendously time consuming going through from one to the next. They're hard for that reason, because they suck up your time. So if you needed to skip a question, that's the type of question I would skip. Okay, so here are some strategies when it comes to the multiple choice. If you're reading this as if you're reading it aloud, you try to hear it in your head. That's useful. As you're doing it, underline, circle, annotate. Know that that's so important. Annotating helps you concentrate, helps make sure you're focusing. All of us has had an experience where we read a paragraph and it's just a blur, and you read it and you've forgotten what you read, or it becomes a haze. Doing these works of underlining or annotating or marking off or circling help you keep that focus. If you pick up rhetorical elements, if you pick up something like onomatopoeia or some literary technique, mark it and circle it, because this all becomes handy. This is also the same approach you should really use when it comes to looking at your poetry and prose essays too. Okay? Do not, when you're answering questions and making decisions, you eliminate the wrong answers and do those kind of work when you're going through it, as you can see on this next part. Immediately eliminate those wrong answers. Try not to get distracted by them, and be aware of your pacing and timing. To make a literary reference, a character like Hamlet who can't make up his mind, once your instincts tell you to pick something, pick it, move along, because there's only so much you can do there. And again, remember, you've taken a bunch of these exams over time. You become stronger at this. Have a little bit more confidence and move forward with that confidence so that you're able to get through those 55 questions. Just, make a decision and move forward with it. Okay. So at those kind of areas, as you're reading it, pay attention to things like enjambment. Enjambment is when one line flows into the other so that you capture the rhythm of what's going on here. If, as you're reading it, if you can make a quick paraphrase of what you're reading so that you can keep an idea of what's going on, that is also quite helpful. All right. Now we're going to go on to practicing multiple choice questions. So this is where you're participating. This is where you're going to be coming in, and what you'll find is that the question will be out there for you to make a selection between A, B, C, D, and E. And you can do that selection after I'm done speaking in a moment. What will happen is, because you have to read, what I've done is given you mini versions for now. Here's a prose passage that's only 2 paragraphs. Most of them will be considerably longer, but we're trying to practice in the context of what we're doing here. So there'll be 4 questions based on this passage. So what I'd like you to do right now is read the passage and try to answer question 1. And what I'll do is I'll give you 60 seconds to try to do both of those things, okay? And then we'll go to the next slide, and before we go to the next slide, we'll see what people have answered, and then we'll move on forward, okay? So I'm going to start the clock now, and I'm shutting up, and I'll speak to you in 60 seconds. Proceed.
For those of you attending live, it's easy to click and drag the poll feature over to the side so it doesn't cover the passage.
All right. So from here on in, the breaks will be shorter. And now it's a good time to put in your poll, your answers, if you haven't yet. I'll give you a moment or 2 to do that. And because I can't see what's going on, Bob, if you could tell me if you think everyone's ready at this point, I'll move to the answer.
Yeah, not too many people answered, but we did get, we got most people coming in with answered question choice D.
That is correct, and we'll move on to it right now. And as you can see, when you're looking at these, I moved forward here. Something jumped, so my apologies. We had a jump in this. My apologies. What I'll point out on if you can see, can you see my cursor right now? If you can see my cursor, you'll see that where there's conscious of a change is one of the answers that's here. Then exchange significant glances is another one that occurs in such a way. Unfortunately, I think there's something that's gone on incorrectly with the PowerPoint right now, where it moved on to the, there it is. So we have the second question. So the first question, just to let you know, the reason why the answer is D was because there's words like conscious of change, and then there's exchange significant glances, and then it says looked ominous, and these indications. All of that indicate that the central character might be confronting a troubling circumstance. So, well, that's moved on to 3. So
Can
I'm
you
going
click back?
back. Now it's back to 2. So if you look at question 2, what you'll see here is on I'll give 30 seconds again to give question 2 a shot and see if you can answer this one. So I'll put 30 seconds on the clock, and please begin and see if you can answer this one. Okay, why don't we give this one, if all the polls are in, please let me know.
Yep, a few more people
Participated in the next one.
participated in some. Looks like B is
B is the correct answer. And again, let me see if I can play around with this. There's something I'm going to show. I'm going to see if I can reveal this through I'll just highlight where the evidence is. For some reason, it's not appearing. But if you see the reason why, he's composed and observant, he's conscious of a change that you see here. And then he noticed that there was an exchange, significant glances, and that his face is, he's got a calm face, okay? And that he notices that there's a Sabbath lull in the air, and as it progresses, he reflects. And again, it jumped for some reason as I'm doing this. So let me go to 3, and we can try this one now. So again, I'll put 30 seconds on the clock, and I will begin. So go ahead, give this one a shot now. Okay, let's see how you did on this one. This is a harder question. Students struggle with this more commonly.
a lot of A and 1 D.
A is correct. And I think this one actually is appearing the way it should. If you see here, the reason why A, he notices the predatory nature of it is where those highlights are. And that's the thing I'd like to emphasize more than anything else. In the passage, I can highlight the answer to each one of these questions. The evidence is there. Now, you still have to make an inference from it, but the evidence by the 2 of the 3 men conversing earnestly together seized as he approached. So there's something sneaky and surreptitious going on there. He notices, I reckon they're after someone. Is after somebody. These are all predatory nature. So therefore, that's why these answers are what they are. Okay, so you're always trying to look for that approach as you go through. So let's try 4 now, and we'll another 30 seconds and give it a shot. All right, so if you can put in your answers, if you haven't yet.
E.
E is correct. And if you look again, look where the evidence is. He was conscious of a change in its moral atmosphere, that bolded section. It looked ominous. I reckon they're after somebody, he reflected. Likely it's me. All of that establishes his mood of apprehension overall. Okay, he's concerned about it all. Now, what I'm going to do right now, because I want to get to the poetry, this is another prose passage sample. So what I'd like you to do is just give this a shot you don't have to do this right now. I'm going to keep it on for 3 seconds of each of these screens so that when you go back on the recording, you can try these out if you're so inclined, okay? So with each of them, I'm hoping you'll see right after it's the answer. And again, notice it's highlighted, it's bolded where the information is that leads to the correct answer. So this is question 2. Just giving a moment for again. You can pause it if you wanted to practice it later on and try to answer these questions. And again, there is the bolded sections for the answers for each of them. And we have the same here. And this is bolded for the answers. To give you an idea where the evidence is. And notice the pattern. Now, this is an accept question. It takes a little bit more time overall to keep that all straight when you're encountering it. But look where the evidence is that shows you all the other choices overall. And there's question number 4. And here is the answer. And this one is, the whole thing is pretty much characterization, which is why it's not there. You can't really find the boldness, the bolding section of it. Now we're going to move on to a poem. Okay, this is going to take a few minutes for you first just to read the poem. The poem, this is a full poem. This is actually from one of the practice tests, so that I wanted to give you something that was a little larger. And I wanted to deal with poetry because I think that's where most students struggle the most. There's more comfort level when it comes to prose. Specifically, many of you have taken AP composition before. So it puts you in a better position. You're used to doing more prose, even though the prose here is more literary, where some of the prose that you had in AP composition might be more expository overall. Okay, so I'm going to shut up and let you read the first part of the poem for a minute. Then I'm going to have you read the second part of the poem, and then we'll start going over the questions. So let me give you a minute to read these first 12 lines.
Mike, just a time check. We're well past the 30-minute time. I think I'm slacking a little bit. It's about 4:37 Eastern.
Sure.
So
I'll move it along and get to where we need to go.
I think we're doing fine, but just to let you know.
Sure. But that was more like 45 seconds, but I'm going to try to be true to your approach that you should read this fairly quickly. So I'm going to give you another 45 seconds to finish it up. So go ahead. All right. So we're moving on to question 1. And as you can see, it's going to take you back through everything. So we're going to move fairly quickly from question to question. I would say, especially since it's a recognition question, let's say 20 seconds to try to answer this one right now. Give it a shot. Okay, have you registered your answers at this point? Have you posted your answers up?
Everybody went A.
They went correct. And again, this is very simple as far as you need to know your terminology. Know that they're going to lean more to the metaphors and onomatopoeias than they might to synecdoche and metonymy. But it's important to start getting those into your repertoire too, where a definition like synecdoche needs as a part represents a whole, where a face of fear may be running in a valley, and metonymy is where some metaphorical aspect represents. It's not accurate, but it represents it. For example, the kettle is boiling. That's not accurate. The kettle isn't really boiling. The water inside is boiling, but it's a shorthand. So you want to start learning these terms to strengthen this. So you see the metaphors of the palms are bowls of china instead of being like bowls of china. That you have there. So let's go on to the next one. And again, 20 seconds, give it a shot. All right. So what do we have? Is everybody recorded at this point? So I'm hoping you lean towards C.
Yep, it's mixed, but C wins.
And again, this is one of those where undulant, you may not know the vocabulary word, but you might still be able to figure this out from the context. And the key word to me is the word steady, where you're looking for the opposite there. Deftly you steady the drunk clamoring on his undulant floor. You're trying to get your balance. And that's why the floor would be wavy, that's why the word steady gives the best indication for such a thing. All right. So now, as you notice, we move on, and then for question 3, moves on to numbers 10 through 15. By the way, I've only done 9 questions here of a list that there's more of them. I think there's about a dozen questions, actually 14 or 15 questions on the actual test, because again, there's only so much we can squeeze in, but it gives you an idea of how many questions can come out of a passage like this one. So 20 seconds on the clock, give it a shot. This, I took a little longer because I think this is the hardest question in the passage. And if you put in your answer, the answer is E.
Yep.
And the idea, and it's a hard one, it really is. And the idea is it's dealing with established conventions in that we associate the clocks with, and the solar system is dealing with time and space, that they become representative of those things. A wrench in the works, and these clocks and the time and the space. Now, these are quite challenging. And at times when you take a test like this, you may scratch your head. And if you get that one wrong and you manage to get 8 out of 9 right, don't sweat it. Look for these approaches and look to improve it. But at the same time, allow for, you're going to disagree at times too. and just be conscious of that, but also try to figure out the logic that seems to appear pretty constantly in these particular tests. All right. So let's try. Number 4 is kind of a key one because it works very nicely, not only with multiple choice, but with essays. And I want to talk about that in a minute. 20 seconds on the clock. Give it a shot. All right. I'll take a second, make sure anyone who wants to put in their answer has, and we move on to see that it introduces a contrasting thought. I want to point out with this, and again, never on time, a wrench, and it goes in a direction and only, and now all of a sudden everything has been, she's a terrible klutz, she's a mess. And then it talks about how lovely she is in the way she treats and behaves with other people. Oftentimes in poems and in prose passages, you see keywords that allow for a shift in what's happening in the poem. That's important in not only the multiple choice, because they'll always ask you about these transitions, but also recognize that when you're writing your essay, where you see the change that's going on. That so many of these poems will have levels of sophistication, but they'll also send you certain markings that will tell you when something's moving in one direction compared to another. Okay, that's going to be key as you go along. So we see this shift that all of a sudden, when it comes to inanimate objects and things, in a way she behaves in one way, but when it comes to the human connection, she's a completely different person overall. All right, give number 5 a shot. 20 seconds. All right, another challenging question. You also should note at this point that we moved on to the last part of the poem. It's been broken up, basically questions 1 and 2 are the first 2 stanzas, 3 and 4 are the second 2 stanzas, 5 and 6 are the last 2 stanzas. 7 through 9 will be more the general questions dealing with the concept of the overall poem. So like I said, it takes you through. So I'm hoping all your answers are in. And again, this is a little one, another one.
Most people answered B.
And this one is more challenging, but again, it is B. And it's a hard question too, because we look at A, D, and E as sort of eliminating themselves, where they're isolated cases that go down. I could see the lover's clumsy nature as a good answer to this question, because it captures more of the general idea here. But what's going on here, this one happens to be better because it speaks to that level of affection. For your hands drop white and empty becomes this big difference that you'd have compared to everything else overall. So the death of a lover is what's being implied in this particular scene, okay? Let's move on to 6. And because I'm going to give 15 seconds for this one because we're already in that passage at this point. So go ahead, give it a shot. All right, let's see how you did on this one. So the answer for 6 is A.
Yep.
Life's pleasures. Good. All right, so let's move on to 7. And if you notice with 7, it's more of a general question. So I'm going to give 8 or 9 seconds on this because it's one of you either know it or you don't when it comes to these type of questions now. All right, so as we move to this one, the answer is E, adoring. And you have, and if you notice words like elegiac, which deals with elegy, is sort of a mournful type of poem. So sometimes it's good to keep practicing this to at least be familiar with the other vocabulary. Everything about this poem shows that the narrator loves this woman, this and even loves her klutziness overall. Go on, give this one a shot. This is all the following except, because it's an except question. I'll go with the 15 seconds because it takes a little longer. Go ahead. All right. I'm giving you a second to make sure you recorded your answer. And if you look at this one, the answer is D. Okay. All of the others are pretty heavy in the poem. Selfish is absent from the poem. So it's one of those that you can just start eliminating. Obviously, she's clumsy and playful and can be gracious at times, despite her clumsiness overall. So, and one final question from this passage. So take a look at number 9. 15 seconds. So this one, the answer is E. Enumeration of the lover's weaknesses. It's called a love poem, and for the first part of it, it feels like he's just trashing his beloved. But as it moves along, we see that there's so much affection involved in it. Okay? So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that what I tried to do is list where the evidence is located too for these answers. Again, I wasn't able to split screen with you, but you can see where the questions for 8 and for 7 are located. These become part of it. As I said, for almost everything, even the more general questions, you can find the evidence inside of the text. All right, we're moving beyond. There's a final multiple choice that we're not going to do. I'm just going to give you 2 seconds to, if you want to, I'm going to allow them to stay up so that if you wanted to practice later on, you'd have that ability. So I'll go through and just move along, show you where the answers are. And again, notice that there's always, the answers always have a bolded section where you can find the evidence that provides for it. Again, this is a tiny little poem, only 8 lines. And so it's good to do some quick practicing, that's a little less stressed out. You'll find when it comes to this, if you have the Elite Edition and go to 5 minutes to a 5, there's 180 of these exercises. So they're filled with these quick practices that you can do. If you don't have the time, or if you just don't want to spend too long concentrating, you only have, you just want to make it a little more breezy overall, because these practices can be awfully intense.
For those
All
folks
right.
watching the recording, you could always just pause the question as you go through and give yourself a little bit more time, press play.
Excellent. Thank you. And yeah, that's the hope overall. We're now moving on to the free response questions. And remember, there's 3 of them. There's the prose essay, and again, that's just regular literature, the poetry essay, and the free response is where you have to respond to a novel or full-length play that's of your choice and of your thinking. Notice all 3 essays are graded the same way. That you need to have a thesis statement. So whatever you're doing, when you're looking at the prose passage or the poetry passage, you need to develop an argument. Then the next thing you want to do is provide evidence as you go through. And finally, at the end, you need to show, this is how you get that last point, that you need to be sophisticated. And sophistication can come from having eloquent writing. It can come from providing great insights at the end. It's that extra level that makes a difference between a good essay and a great essay. And that's hard to pull off. And really the best way of doing that, of course, is through constant practice. Okay, so we're talking about the readings are about 500 to 700 words when you're coming across a prose passage. They're usually not incredibly long overall, but again, it's going to take some time for you to read that. Mark it up as well as you can, and then try to figure out what your argument is going to be. When you're going and presenting your argument, you want to show not just what the argument is, but how the author has gone about conveying that argument. That means literary technique. What are they doing when it comes to the perspective of various characters? What are they doing when it comes to diction? And language, word choice, and what's going on that way. Maybe a setting becomes part of it. Maybe there's irony being presented. You want to get that all across as you go through, okay? And looking in such a way. That's the below is the basic rubric for what you want to do for the prose passage. Poetry, same type of thing. The poem itself is often from about 100 to 300 words. They're not tiny like the one I just showed you. They have to be substantive enough for you to build and respond to one. We're going to do one in a minute, Dover Beach, that is a little longer and again has enough substance so that you could really write something well. Same approaches, okay? That you're using the same approach, only now it's poetry rather than prose when you're doing it. And finally, the free response essay. And again, you're going to select, there'll be a prompt that you're given. This is so important when you're looking at the prompt. The prompt will give you an idea about a question about literature or a quote about literature, something to that extent. And then we'll have a list of suggested works below. Do not worry about the suggested works. Worry about the works that you have prepared and see whether the works you have prepared work into that question. Pick the one that you're most comfortable with writing about from that question. If there's a list of works and they happen to match what you're deciding on, all the better. But you don't worry about that. You really worry about knowing these 5 works of literature very well and preparing that accordingly. Okay? We'll get back to that. That'll be the last thing we do. Now we're going to work with a sample text. You're reading, and Bob, I'll probably need about 10 minutes to get through everything else that we're doing right now before you go into your next approach. Is that okay?
That's perfect timing. We're about 4 minutes short of the hour mark. So you're doing
right.
Great. Yep.
All right. So what I need you to do first as a group is spending a minute reading each part of this poem. It will be in 3 different slides. The first 2 will need a minute, and the third one you'll need 30 seconds because it'll be a smaller part. But if you look at the prompt, read carefully the following poem by Matthew Arnold. Then write an essay analyzing how Arnold employs literary techniques to develop complex meaning through the speaker. You may wish to consider such elements as setting, consonants, pacing, allusion, tone, and symbolism. When that information is given to you, you don't have to pick any of those. Try to pick a couple of them, but also look for your own literary technique. I will now shut up and let you read. I'll read it to myself and give you a few extra seconds, and then we'll move on to the next part. So begin. All right, I'm going to move on to the next part. Read this, and I'll move on in probably 35 seconds or so. All right, and now the last part, which is shorter, and we'll talk about it in about probably 20 seconds. So you have this poem, and you may or may not understand much about it. Your goal at this point is seeing if you can have a basic understanding of what's happening. You have a setting right at the beginning. And if you notice, what I tried to do is mark off some of the literary techniques on this first slide and bring you through the poem that you just read. Poem itself really deals with a narrator who looks out towards the water, looks out to the cliffs of Dover and out towards the English Channel, towards France. And as he's looking out, he sees a calm, peaceful water, but then he begins to think. And the more he thinks, the sadder he gets. He calls his beloved to the window, and they look out, and he starts making references to Greece and a land of old, and he starts thinking, and his thoughts become darker and darker. And we'll deal with those darker thoughts as we keep making our way through the poem. So you might write an introduction, an argument where you talk about a writer, a poet, who becomes increasingly disillusioned over the course of this poem. And that might be all you have until you start really combing through and seeing how the author goes about sending that message. Well, if you look at that setting on lines 1 to 5, he starts off by creating really a serene outlook overall. And that serenity is built up for quite a while. And then it starts shifting. Then we start looking at his calling over his beloved. And if you notice, every time he calls over his beloved, there seems to be some sort of exclamation point when he does it. Come to the window, sweet as the night air. So he calls someone over. And then if you look a little further as he talks to her on line 9, listen. Okay, notice another exclamation point. And again, it jumped ahead, so let me get back to there. You hear the grating roar. And if you notice, all of this is the perspective of the narrator. The narrator's there at the window. He calls over his beloved. He listens to the tidal roars of the pebbles sucking back and forth. And as he progresses, he sees other things and realizes other things as he goes through. He looks at it. And as he tries to make sense of all of this, he notices certain things. Notice I marked off the pathetic fallacy. The pathetic fallacy on lines 10 to 14 is when the external environment is a reflection on what's going on in the internal. That he feels a sadness that's going, and the outside world brings in other things. Notice I listed the pacing there. And the pacing through the use of commas slows down what you're reading. That you have here: at return and up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin with a trembling cadence slow and bring. So that kind of sadness is reflected also in the pacing, that has a more funereal pace, that slows us down to look at this, that all of these things are being set up in such a way. Notice that at the bottom, I wrote the words deliberate diction and downbeat diction. There are words that I started to highlight on this page that will continue to be highlighted on the next pages, where I said deliberate diction, that a lot of the diction talks about that slower pacing, where you have grating and slow, and on the next page you'll have turbid and withdrawing. And then you'll have more sad or downbeat diction, where sadness appears on this page, but as you progress, you'll see more of that occur, where you see the words misery and melancholy that are here, and drear, that all of those words will be downbeat on this page. Notice that there is a strong illusion that occurs right now. That's part of what's happening. The reference to Sophocles, who wrote great Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex and Antigone. Sophocles heard this long ago, so there's a connection that there's a long time with this. And that this has been going on. He felt the same things. And there's a sensitivity towards human misery, and that this is part of a continuum of looking through history and understanding this in such a way. Notice also other literary techniques. You have a symbol, the sea of faith. And that sea of faith will become an extended metaphor. An extended metaphor is something that continues for many lines. And here the sea of faith runs us through about 4 or 5 lines. And that's why there's another literary term for an extended metaphor known as a conceit. So all of these occur, just like the simile occurs, they like the folds of a bright girdle furled. Similarly, you get another literary technique there, consonants, in that the consonants, all those L sounds, consonants mean when you use a number of the same consonant sounds, and it doesn't have to be the first letter in there. Notice all that, well, you have lay and like with the L's, but folds, the L there, and girdle and furled. All of this, again, can slow down the pacing. That will lead to the assonance, which is vowel sounds slowing down the pace, that you get with the melancholy, long, withdrawing roar. That these long vowel sounds, again, make this a sad pacing that occurs. Okay? So you're using all that to show that the narrator moves from really finding a serene setting and his thoughts become increasingly dark, and the techniques that the narrator uses bring out those darker approaches. Notice he goes back to his beloved at the very end. He goes, "Ah, love, let us be true to one another." Another exclamation point every time he sort of calls over his beloved. And his beloved, we start finding, becomes his great source of comfort as his thoughts get darker and darker. At least he has his beloved to cling on to as he comes up with this insight, which is the end of the poem, which is what you really want to write about as some of the content. He says, "For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night." So all of this stuff comes along and gives you this rhythm, anaphora. Anaphora is repeating of the initial sounds in a rhythm, the so that you get there, and then you get the neither, nor, 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 and it builds a rhythm, an incredibly depressing rhythm, that all these things that seem so hopeful are so sad, and all that's going on is confusion in which ignorant armies are clashing by night. So you get all of these complicated feelings. And yes, at the end of it, you get this ambiguity where you're not clear what they mean by these ignorant armies clashed by night. But what you try to do is come up with multiple interpretations and say it isn't clear. But maybe those armies are indicating that there's dark violence that's happening. Or maybe these armies are fighting over things that they don't even understand. And sometimes when you come up with these different reactions, they can dovetail nicely and make sense together. So there's a lot there. And there's a lot to go through for all of these. And my advice is to keep practicing them and keep taking those essays again and again, and look at the samples that are there in 5-Step 205. We do not have time right now to go through the prose essays because there's only so much we can do for a 3-hour exam in the short time that we have together. But my advice to you, if you want to really start trying to understand how to tear through a prose passage, go for the elite edition of 5 Minutes to a 5 of pages 453 to 463, and you'll find a great deal that's handy there. So Finally, just a couple other things, and then I'll go to Bob, and then we'll return one more time to answer questions and catch up on a few other things. That when you're doing your response to poetry and prose, look as much as possible to develop and support your line of reasoning, to build your thesis and integrate literary techniques. Try to write look, it's a first draft, but read it over at the end. In the 40 minutes, in the last 5 minutes, try to look it back over, clean up a few things. If you have to add a quick comment here or cross out or add a word that you missed in your writing in your fury, throw it in at that point and make sure you get that all across. Because right now I'm not sure if we have the time, I'm just going to point out that when you're going through the free response essays, know 5 works well and know the details of them. Get specifics down. Make sure you know the literary techniques. I will lead this on for 5 seconds and move on to the next one to show you, here's techniques for a whole bunch of books. The first page has Hamlet, Jane Eyre, Oedipus, Their Eyes Are Watching God. Second page has The Color Purple, The Stranger, Things Fall Apart, Frankenstein, Crime and Punishment, The Great Gatsby, The Things They Carried. So these are all, you can look at these at your leisure to get an idea of some of those techniques I might want to prepare and look for scenes over. Finally, what you have here, here's a sample prompt. And I'll read that prompt to you. Often in literature, a literal figurative journey is a significant factor in the development of a character or the meaning of a work. Either from your own reading or from the list below, and it's not offered here because we don't have the space, choose a work of fiction that represents the effects of literal figurative journey on a character or on the meaning of the entire work. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the journey affects the character or the meaning of the work as a whole. Take a moment right now and see if you can come up with a book that makes sense there. As you're doing it, remember the figurative journey. It doesn't have to be a literal journey. It allows you to do a lot of different choices as a result. So take a moment and see what you can come up with. Below that is a sample of a very good introductory paragraph from Jane Eyre. I give you 3 different introductory paragraphs, one from Jane Eyre, another one from Sun Also Rises, and another one from Heart of Darkness. I point them out because they're 3 completely different ways of writing that introduction. You're going to use your voice and use it well for all of them. Here are other ones. So you could try to look at these sample opening paragraphs and see what you can do with each of them. You could read them back over when you get the chance and use these as samples. Again, a lot of this material is also in 5 minutes, 5 steps to a 5. So I would like to, for now, go on and let Bob take over. And this way we'll have enough time to go over any questions, and I'll have some last minute suggestions to you too. Bob?
Okay, thanks everybody. Just as a reminder, I think I'm not muted, am I? Those last couple slides, Mike, are super valuable to everybody that's taking this test. So just as a reminder to everybody, the recording will be here. Come back and use it, because I think that his suggestions in those last few slides can be really valuable heading into test day. All right, so a little bit about our online course. If you can hit that slide, Mike. I will give you a few seconds if you want to take a picture of this with your phone or jot it down. Here is the URL, mheducation.com/5stepslit, and there's your access code. By joining us today or viewing the recording, you're getting access to our online 5 Steps to a 5 platform. And it's a really, I'm going to spend just 5 or so minutes showing you the ins and outs, just the basics of what it is. But really the best way to see its best use as a study tool is to go in yourself, and it doesn't take any time at all to get in. So if you can stop sharing now, Mike, and then I'm going to start.
Okay. With any luck, I just did.
You did. Can you see that? Mike, can you see the?
I can't see anything on my screen. I think, I don't,
Yes,
is
we can
anybody else
see,
out
Bob.
there?
Bob, we
Got-
can see it, yeah.
Okay,
Good.
thank you. All right, so for everybody, you pop in the into that URL and enter your code. You're gonna get right in. It's gonna ask you to enter your name and an email address. Please know up front, you will get no spam from us. It's not there, you're not at any risk of getting on any mailing list or anything. You'll get exactly one email that will verify that you joined into our program, and that's the extent of it. It'll take less than 30 seconds to get in, and here you go. The first thing the program's going to ask you, and I've already skipped a couple of steps for time, is to pick your test date. And I think I picked up from you, Mike, that it's May 3rd,
Yes.
early this year, right?
Yeah, it's pretty, generally it's one of the early exams.
You've got exactly 48 days today until the May 3rd exam. So you'll put that test date in there, and then every time you come back, when you'll sort of create your study plan in here, that will automatically be the first thing you see is how many days you have left. And all this stuff on your dashboard, which is this first page, will be updated. Like for me, I just came in today for the first time. I've already surpassed my knowledge goal by clicking around a little bit, and I have now officially 2% of my way through the full study plan. All right, so I got a ways to go, but 48 days to go. Another thing I like to just mention here is this platform is available on your laptop, on your Chromebook, whatever it is you're using in school. It also crosses right over onto your cell phone. So if you're in school or working with your teacher and you get on practice test, you get to number 25, you log out, you jump on the bus and you open your phone, that's going to start at question number 26. It's going to be, it automatically updates no matter which way you're getting in there. So real quick, this dashboard you'll see that your average percentile rank of the questions you answer, your average score on the tests will come up. And then your strengths and weaknesses. Poetry, the essay, the poetry essay, the prose review, free response questions. As you run through the course, this data will automatically come and go live and show you where you are and what your strengths and weaknesses are as you proceed through it. You've got a basic study plan here. It's everything that's in our 5 Steps to a 5. This one's a little bit different than our typical setup because it's mostly built around the test, and everything that you would see that you need is right here in your study plan. There's a game center, some really pretty basic flashcard based games. You know, you're on the bus and you want to run through some stuff. You're not going to get any crazy, effects. But it is, you want to run through some Card Hunter 1, Card Hunter 2, Card Coupler. It's a little bit of a gamified way of going through your study materials. A discussion board. Let's see if there's anything on here. There's nothing yet. But this is a sort of a social connection type of thing where students are in here and you can, other people that are in there using the platform, other AP Lit students, hey, did you see number 9 on that test? Why was it C and not D, and that type of stuff. It's not hugely used in a big way, but it is an interesting feature when it's up. The lessons. So this is the last couple pieces will be probably the most valuable to you as a student and as a teacher. Everything you see that's broken down, that's in our guide, is broken down as a lesson. As I said earlier, it's a little bit of self-guided. I took the opportunity to go through the comprehensive review prose section while earlier today, and you can go through, and every little piece that comes up, you rate your confidence on that subject, so that the next time you come back in, anything that you rated yourself high, the introduction is whatever to prose, 5 aspects of every narrative, the types of novels, I think I got down pat. But when it came to the literary terminology and prose analysis, when I went through that, I really said, you know what, I better come back to this. So I graded myself low. The next time I come back in, I can see where I self-graded myself low or medium. It's probably the best place to start. Anywhere you're already rating yourself high, you probably don't need to come back and review. So this is basically, as I said earlier, just a simple breakdown of all the lessons you can get and everything that's in our 5 steps guide. The flashcards, to me, are the best part about this program. And I think you'll agree if you get in here, we have 107 total flashcards related to AP Lit. You just do one click. And if you know it, again, did you get it right? Yes, kinda, or no. If you get yourself yes, you won't see it again until you start, you want to start them all over again after you've been through. Alliteration, got it. Illusion, I wasn't so clear on, so I'm going to say, oh, that's a little bit of a no. And then next time I come back in, that one will pop back up. The flashcards are, worth the price of admission, if nothing else. You're on the bus, you're studying it anywhere, you want to run through 100 cards or so a couple days before the test. This is a really good and useful tool. And lastly, probably most importantly, and I think, Mike, you'll agree, there are 3 full-length practiced AP Lit tests in here. Most of our authors and teachers will recommend to the students, excuse me, how important it is to do at least one, if not more, full-length practice test before you go in on May 3rd. If not, even if you're super confident in your knowledge and the ways you're going to, what you're going to write in your essays and approach the poetry, it's still a great exercise to sit the entire 3 hours, knock it out, concentrate for the exact amount of time that you're given for each section, and work through it. I think everyone agrees that that's a really good idea for anyone who's seriously about scoring high. And again, as you go through, you can click here if you want to revisit the question later, or just go through and it'll, on the tests, it won't allow you to check the answers as you go through. You can have it in the review sections, you can do that, but the test is trying to mimic the actual, it will let you track your confidence level, but for the rest of the test, it won't show you the answers until the very end. So it sort of tries, we do our best to try to mimic the actual exam you'll be sitting for. You saw that silly, what does it say, hammer time? Up here, there's a little mailbox that's going to show you things that you unlock. Just looks kind of fun things up there. And then your account information, the things that you have access to will be found up here. It's a really robust and user-friendly platform. Again, this was just a real simple introduction to it. I would recommend teachers, please go out and share the access codes with other educators. Students, share with your friends, go in yourselves between now and the test. It is a great resource. Mike, I'm going to stop sharing if we can come back to you and just pop up that screen again one last time. We do want to get as many eyeballs on that thing as we can, just because we know how useful it is, and the feedback has been really positive. Can you share that slide one more time, please?
Okay, let's see here.
Well, here it is. Well, Anya's got it up in the chat. I don't know if everyone can see that. Thank you, Anya. In the chat, the URL is there again with the access code, and share that access code again with fellow teachers, fellow students. Anyone can get in there and use it. All right, well, that's it on the digital. I'm going to hand it back to you, Mike, and see if there's any sort of final thoughts you wanted to go through before we call it.
Sure. Do we have any questions at all before I jump in?
I don't see any questions posted in the Q&A or the chat.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, because it's also on the bench prep and all the material that you have, there's a new component in the book called Plotzamar. It's chapter 10, and it's a very good way to expand your essays. It basically takes different techniques and runs through from everything from perspective to language, to omissions, to techniques, to sound, to what's unusual, to mechanics, to ambiguity, to repetition. That whole approach is there because students often struggle to figure out how much to write. They get about a paragraph or two in, and then they run out of gas. This is a great way of finding enough to write about. It's a short chapter, but it takes you through how to expand your essays without saying nonsense and saying things that are actual, substantial, and powerful. So that's a new addition, and that's just something based on a lot of years of seeing where students struggle. So it's a very practical extra approach that might be useful to students overall. So I just want you to make sure to do that. And because we didn't have as much time for the end, please go back and look at some of the literary techniques that are there when it comes to the various books, because that will help you a great deal in becoming comfortable. For every book that you read, make sure you have 3 or 4 important literary techniques. Maybe there's the soliloquies in Hamlet that you'd focus on, or maybe there is symbolism in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest that might be useful. So you look for the things to emphasize. A first person narrator. Have that in your pocket so that every time you're writing an essay, those elements are going to make sense to appear. So just getting comfortable with those areas. Everything else is really there for you from the material that Bob has discussed, and you could work online. If you just discipline yourself, I believe you do very well on this exam.
Mike, we got a couple quick questions. There's one that asks how often you suggest doing multiple choice questions between now and the exam.
I would say if you can do it, and this is the difficulty, when I'm doing it in my class, if the students are honest and can do it on their own, try to do a test a week, 55 questions, 1 hour a week. But if you needed to do 3, where you do over the 6 weeks, 1 every 2 weeks, that's something that's workable. Because sometimes there's a burnout if you're doing that much multiple choice and then they have to write. There's one other thing I'd like to say about that when it comes to essays. If you're writing 1 essay a week, you're writing 1 essay, but then you're looking at the other 2 essays and at least writing an introduction just to keep practicing and understanding how to go about doing that work. So it's anywhere from once a week to 1 every 2 weeks to do it.
Thank you, Mike. And last, there's someone asked, is chapter 10 in the study guide? I'm not sure exactly what that means. Do you understand, Mike?
Well, chapter 10 is in the new edition, and I saw it on your bench prep too. So it should be everywhere at this point.
What is that? That's the chapter.
Chapter 10 is the approach. It's a practical approach called Plotzamar, and it basically explains how to expand all essays.
Okay, let's just make sure.
And I saw that when you were scrolling along on bench prep, you had it there.
Plotzamar. Yep. So it is in the guide. And to answer your question, I wasn't sure. I went back with a response, but it is in the guide and it is on the online
right
program. So thanks for your question.
Okay.
All right. It looks like that's the end of our questions. Unless anyone has any final thoughts, I think we're just about at time. I think we did pretty well, Mike.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And good luck to you. I hope you do well on the exam.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good luck. Thanks for joining us and take care.